are talking about processing death, the physical death of a human being, and being able to do that in a godly, righteous, God-glorifying manner. And it's one of those things that I personally don't think that the Christian church does a good job at, because we don't talk about it enough. The one scripture that we started with, and I'm going to go to a couple more this morning, but the one we started with was 1 Thessalonians 4:13. I do not want you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning those who have fallen asleep, lest you sorrow as those who have no hope. We as believers should stand out because we have hope. Now, the one thing we're going to deal with, and someone asked, are you going to deal with this? Yes, I'm going to deal with this, but we're not going to do it this morning. We won't get that far. And that is this. What if the person who passed away, did not go to heaven? How do you deal with that one? And believe it or not, that happens. I know that when you go to a funeral, everybody goes to heaven. I haven't been to a funeral yet where they say, we're not sure if this one made it. Everybody goes to heaven, doesn't make any difference. But the truth of the matter is, according to what Jesus said, he said it two different ways. In Luke, he said that when the disciples asked him, will everyone be saved? He made the statement that, no, most people will not. And then he talked about it a different way. Broad is the way that goes to destruction, narrow is the way that goes to life. Few find the narrow way, most take the broad way. That is never brought up at a funeral, because we don't handle death well. That's just the best way to say it. And we would be afraid that, people would freak out that with the realization that their husband or their child or their relative actually went to hell. And see, I tend to be very black and white. I tend to be a realist. And because of that, sometimes I'm accused of not having enough feeling. And that might be true, I don't know. But my first thoughts are, if you're going to freak out at the funeral at the thought of this person might have gone to hell, you should have done that a while back and gotten them saved. Why did you wait to freaking out till there's nothing we can do about it? You should have freaked out a year or two ago, realizing this person's headed for hell. But see, that's part of what I want to talk about this morning. We avoid the subject for numerous reasons, and some are not necessarily bad reasons. But we avoid the subject with people because, well, we don't want to hurt their feelings. We don't want to cause problems in the relationship. And on and on. We don't want to seem pushy with our beliefs. On and on. There's all kinds of reasons. Now, I can guarantee you, once we get to the other side, and if they're lost, all our reasons are worthless. When you compare one day in hell to, well, I didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. You should have hurt somebody's feelings and taken the chance. Well, I could have lost a relationship. Well, guess what? You're going to lose it for eternity now, because you're not where they are. We're really poor at dealing with death because we don't, and here's my thought for this morning, we don't live life from an eternal perspective. We live life from a daily, most people is daily or weekly perspective. It's amazing. At the beginning of next year, well, here we are next year. Beginning of this year, once we finish the series that I was supposed to finish last Sunday, we'll get that done. And then we're going to be talking about vision a little bit and readdressing that from a different angle, marrying my vision for Word of Life and Word of Life's vision and so forth. But the previous study we did on vision, we spent quite a bit of time dealing with short-term, intermediate-term, and long-term vision. And it's the short term is like 2 to 3 years. Intermediate term is 5 years, 10 years. Long term is 25 years plus. It can be a lifetime. What's the end goal you're after in your life? Long-term vision. And all of us, to have progress, we need to have our life broken out into different forms of vision. Whether it's a short-term vision tells us if we're making progress towards the long term. And, we've been at this for a year or two. Any progress? Long-term, it can take a lifetime to figure out if we actually hit the vision or not. Problem is, when you're at the end, if you didn't hit the vision, it's too late. But the part that amazed me, because we just went through this, it was going to be a one-service thing, and I was going to go through this short, intermediate, long-term vision, and it's in the book. It's laid out really well in the book. I thought I'll just hit this. And I was amazed because I thought everybody had intermediate and long-term vision. And I was shocked. We ended up sitting on this subject for quite a while in that series, which was 12 years ago, because most Americans, I asked somebody I think it was a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about something. I said, well, they were trying to figure out what they should do with their job and et cetera, and they didn't really like their job, and should they change this? I said, so where do you plan to be in 5 years? Give me a short intermediate vision. It's a long short-term vision, but a short intermediate term vision. 5 years, I have no idea. 5 years, I haven't thought that far out. That's your problem. You're struggling with today because you have no idea where you're going. That's Americans. If I've got enough money to make my next house payment next month, I'm good. There's no reason to think beyond that. I mean, that's a lot of pressure to think beyond that. And we're very short-term vision. So to say you need to have an eternal perspective, that is so far over the head of most people, including Christians, that we don't live there. We don't think that way. And as a result, when it comes up to physical death and the spirit leaves and we're going one direction or the other, we don't know how to handle that if we're still on this earth. And most people, we did very little to help them to prepare to handle it if they're the one leaving. Because we don't live from an eternal perspective. And many times, in my opinion, that's one of the reasons we don't stand out when it comes to difficult situations, death situations, things like that. We should be the stalwarts of strength in the middle of those difficult situations. And many times we're as collapsed and falling apart as everybody else. But it is what it is. So I've contemplated this many times. I was going to bring I forgot, we were in a counseling right before, and I didn't get my thoughts gathered well enough. I was going to bring in a copy of my book, the first book I wrote, which was A Breath of Antichrist. Because in that, I feel, is the reason why many times Americans don't handle death well, which that book doesn't necessarily talk about that. That was a piece of revelation knowledge that I felt the Lord gave me concerning end times and what is the main motivating factor we have to deal with in end times, which is, according to the book of Thessalonians, it's the rise of lawlessness. And the lawless one, which will be the Antichrist. So it talks about the power of lawlessness and how that we're going to have to deal with the power of lawlessness. Well, in the last year or two, that has become really obvious, that lawlessness is really gaining momentum. I don't want to get on anybody's bad side, but I really feel bad about, and I won't mention her name, but the lady police officer that just got jail time for that whole situation. If we'd roll this thing back to where I was in high school or a young man out of high school, roll this thing back, and my parents were here, and I'd ask them, what's your opinion of what happened there? They'd say flat out 100% this was, and I won't say his name either, this was his fault. 100% flat out, there's no questions. She should be off scot-free. Because had he not resisted arrest and done what he was told by the authorities, he'd be alive today. He'd be fine. They would put it 100% on him. We now are in a society where the lawbreaker was defended by someone who was caught in a really bad spot and had to make a quick decision. The lawbreaker was defended as being the one okay. You say, what is that? That is the spirit of lawlessness. Just take it and plug it into society. That's it. And we're gaining momentum that direction. That now it's okay if you burn down a city as long as you have a good reason. And the reason has to be good. Something like you have your feelings hurt or something. It's got to be a good reason. But it's okay to take someone's life's work and destroy it. Burn down their business, burn down the building they owned, just destroy their life's work because you got your feelings hurt or you feel you're not being heard. And in our society, the person who got their feelings hurt and not being heard is being lifted up as well. They had the right to do that because after all, and the person who was totally violated could have lost everything, maybe did lose everything. Well, it's too bad for you. That's lawlessness. And that's gaining momentum. So the thing that the Lord showed me that I put in that book, and this is kind of the heart of the book, and then I just go through tons of scripture showing where it's at, how the scripture shows it. We just never see it because we're Americans and we all struggle with this. What is the power of lawlessness? What causes someone to break the law? 100% of the time. I ran every scenario I can think of. And 100% of the time it comes back to one thing. What causes somebody to be lawless or break the law? I wanted to. Someplace they measured this. Well, I had to because I had to drive 99 miles an hour and run the old man off the road because my wife was in labor and I had to get her to the hospital. You did not have to do that. You wanted to do that because you were afraid and you wanted to protect your wife. Whatever the reasons are, you still made the choice. Do I do this or don't I do this? And something inside you said, what is going on right here is more important than anything else in life. You know what that's called? Selfishness. Selfishness is the power of lawlessness. Lawlessness doesn't happen to people who are more concerned about the other person than themselves. I will not break into your house, steal your stuff if I'm more concerned about you than me. I'll do it if I think I have the right to it because after all, you're the one with the big fancy job and you can just go out and replace it anyway. See, I don't have that because I was too lazy to go to school. So therefore I don't make as much money, so therefore you owe me. And the problem is, today, the laws protect me for breaking into your house. If you wouldn't have broken my house, I wouldn't have blown your head off. Yep. Well, you shouldn't have done that anyway, because they might not have been in their right mind. So they're going to come into my house, not in their right mind, damage me, my wife, my family, and I'm going to stand there and smile at them? That's what the law wants you to do. We're supposed to look for a window to get out. In Minnesota. You can't even defend your own property here according to the law. We're supposed to escape. That's the first choice. I'm right on that, aren't I? We're supposed to escape. You do not confront. You escape. Because they're being lawless, and they've got the right to do it. You say, well, what motivates a person to be lawless? Selfishness. That is the same thing that keeps us from having an eternal perspective. You say, what do you mean by eternal perspective? Could you bring up James chapter 4? I'll be in the New King James. We'll start at verse 13. Here's one of the scriptures. Jesus talked about eternal perspective all the time. This one just makes it really plain, and we'll read this one. Eternal perspective, everything, let me sum it up before we read it. Everything in life needs to be filtered through what will this do in eternity. Everything, every decision, every choice, every goal, every plan, every dream, everything needs to be filtered through what does this produce in eternity. But see, Americans, the world now, because lawlessness is not an American problem, this is a worldwide thing. The Bible is not an American book. It's actually an Eastern book. So this whole thing is a worldwide thing. Lawlessness or selfishness true selfishness or lawlessness doesn't care about what it affects down the road. I want what I want right now. And I'll make decisions on the basis of what I want right now. And if we're selfish enough, we'll break the law to get my way. And I don't care how it affects you. That's not my issue, how it affects you. You shouldn't have been on the road anyway. It's almost the concept of it's a public place, but you shouldn't have been there anyway because I had to drive fast because I was late for work. And I can't help it that there was an accident. I had to get to work. Yeah, but you were breaking the law. Well, you shouldn't have been on the road anyway. There'll be every excuse except for, you know what, you're right, I was wrong. Selfishness won't own that. I wanted to do it, therefore I have the right to do it, and that doesn't matter what the law says or what anybody else says. I'm going to do what I want to do. The true core of lawlessness is selfishness. Selfishness does not look into eternity, because when you measure things against eternity, you have a new problem you have to deal with. It's not a 4-letter word, it's a 3-letter word. God. If you're going to look into eternity, you have to face, is there a God? Is there not a God? If there is a God, he's God. That means I'm not God. It means I'm probably going to have to answer to him. I want to do my thing. I'm selfish. I don't want to answer to a different authority. Therefore, I am not going to think about eternal things because I want to do my thing now. And if I put too much mental energy into an eternal perspective, I have to face the fact that I will give account one day. I don't want to give account to anybody. I'm selfish. I'm so selfish, I'm willing to be lawless. Don't make me angry. I'll come over and burn your house down. I'll ruin your car. And don't you dare touch me because you'll go to jail, not me. In our laws today. Which tells you the depth lawlessness has gotten into our government. They're willing to make laws that protect the lawless. So we're well into this thing, what Paul was talking about, that the spirit of Antichrist, or the Antichrist, is going to rise on the spirit of lawlessness, or the power of lawlessness. The thing that gives lawlessness power is selfishness. Love totally removes the power from selfishness. Once I become concerned whether I'm going to hurt your feelings, lawlessness goes away. if I'm actually concerned that I'm going to do something to hurt you, then I won't do something to hurt you. So now lawlessness it dissolves. It has no power. The power of lawlessness when life becomes all about me. The power that the kingdom of darkness has over the human race right now is we are in an escalating time of selfishness or lawlessness, which means we're not thinking about anything beyond now. This week, next week, maybe next year, but it's right now. What I want right now is what matters, okay? So when you take that and you plug that into eternal perspectives, it doesn't work. And without us even knowing it, we're being absorbed, influenced by this same perspective of selfishness. That's why the average Christian doesn't have intermediate or long-range goals. What are you going to do if you lose your job? What's your plan? I don't have a plan. Well, you better make one. That's not wisdom. Well, it scares me. Well, then you need to deal with your fear, because that's not God either. Well, I don't know what I do. Well, you need to make a plan. Well, we'll worry about it if it ever comes. There you go. That's genius. It's like you can't do that. That's not God. God has an extremely long-term plan in that he chose you before he ever put this world together. And laid out our lives before he ever created the physical realm. Our life was already planned how he wanted it to go. He has long-term plans. That's how God thinks. But if we come out of wisdom and get into selfishness, it's all about us. This scripture talks about that. Verse number 13, it says this. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such city, spend a year there, buy and sell and make a profit. Whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and it vanishes away. And the best picture of that to me is the old steam kettle on the stove. And you got the strong steam coming out, and it comes out about that far really strong, and then it gets less and less, and by the time it's out about that far, it disappears. He said that's what your life is like. It starts out really strong, and it doesn't take long. It just kind of gets less and less, and poof, you're gone. You're off this earth. You're elsewhere. He says, so why are you making plans like you're going to be here for a long time? You don't even know what's happening tomorrow. Next verse. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. Oh. That is a long-term perspective. You say, why? Because everything God does is not about right now. Everything God does has a long plan attached to it. Everything he asks you to do is not about right now. And I've challenged people. I said, tell me something God has asked you to do that has an effect this week, and then after that it goes away and it will affect nothing ever again. It's just real short term, boop, it's over. There's nothing. Everything God asks, if God is talking to you about stopping lying, that will have a long-term effect tied to it. So as soon as you bring God into the picture, well, what does God want? If the Lord wills, well, then we'll go and we'll sell things, we'll buy things, we'll do this and that, we'll make a profit. As soon as you bring God into the picture, you're bringing an eternal perspective in the picture, because God doesn't think over the measure of 10, 20, 30, 50 years. God thinks eternity, because that's where he lives. So now when you say, what does God think? You're immediately going to be challenged to think generations. Immediately. Choices parents make It's like dropping a rock in water. It goes out for generations. Okay, next verse. But now you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. 17 yet? Now we quote this verse, but we never quote it in context with what he just talked about. Therefore, to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. And I've heard people quote that and apply it in every conceivable way, and it's not bad, but we never quote it in the application of the 3 verses in front of it, which was, if you're making plans without running it through the filter of what does God want, you're in sin. That's the context. Go back. Let's read it again. Start at verse number 13. Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell, and make a profit. So we're making plans for tomorrow, for our life. Verse 15. Flip it. Here we go. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live. If God is in this thing, we'll live and we'll go to the city and we'll make a profit and we'll do this, that, and the other. So we should not be saying, you know what I think I'm going to do tomorrow? That's sin. We should be saying, if God is good with this, this is my plan for tomorrow. Amen. That's good. Which shows you how every day we're supposed to be walking with the Spirit, amen, led by the Spirit. Yes. And if you want to get really black and white on this verse, to not live every day walking with and led by the Spirit is sin. That's what he's saying. Because we ought to be measuring every day with, okay, here's what we're doing this week. If God's good with this. Myself included. We don't live like that. What are you going to do this week? Well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that and the other. Is God good with that? I don't know. I haven't talked to him about it. You're in sin. It's a sin of omission. You should have found out before you made the plan. Which will drag us into an eternal perspective. Because there's a lot of things that we're going to do this week that will fill our week, and I don't know of anybody who is not busy. Everybody's busy. But I know a lot of people who are very unproductive. You know, we can go on vacation and be busy from morning till night, but have produced nothing. Is that too straight? I mean, that's, and you should be able to enjoy yourself on vacation. But I'm just comparing busyness and productivity. When I'm at home, I can get more done in 2 hours than a whole day on vacation. If you're weighing something on being productive or just busy. Well, God's going to want us to be productive. So there are some things in our plan he may not want us to do. Now we're back to what we talked about originally. But I want to do them. Selfishness. And selfishness will pull you out of an eternal perspective. Because God may say, I want you to do this next week, knowing that what you do will affect the rest of your life and maybe your children and grandchildren's lives. The decisions you make this week could have 2-3 generations worth of results. But I wanted to go to the mall and see where this shooting took place. And we spent a whole day down at the mall, and we were so busy and came home so tired. And what did you produce? What productivity came out of that? Well, we got to see something, and what will that produce? See, God may say, skip them all. Let's do this. Well, but I wanted to go to the mall. See, now we're back to that same underlying. You say, you can't be serious. I am serious. Jesus said he didn't do anything except the Father showed him. There is the example. He wasn't the one off. We're the ones who've gotten so far off.
True. Yep, amen. That's right.
This is almost dancing time. We're seeing something. If the Lord wills, we shall do this or that. Go to verse 16. But now you boast. He's calling it arrogance to say, well, this is what we're going to do without checking in with God. He's calling it boasting and arrogance, and it's evil. Wow. Next verse. Here's the sin part. Therefore, to him who knows to do good, what would be the good that we're supposed to do? Pick up God's opinion on what you're doing. And does not do it, to him it is sin. There it is. But this is how America, this is how the world, this is how the church lives. We don't pick up God's opinion on everything. In fact, let's just be honest. We don't pick up God's opinion on 99% of everything. Most of what we do, we have no idea if God's in favor or against. The greatest bulk. We've never even took the time to pray about it. Get a feeling in our gut. Does this feel good? Does this feel bad? And God looks in on that and he says, that's sin. Sin is not, again, don't get this big evil, oh, they're evil monsters, they're sinners. No, sin means you're missing what God wants you to do. You're missing the mark. You're off the course. You've missed the path. You'll probably do something that will produce either nothing or bad. You might eventually hit something that produces good. But you're in sin. You're to be in sin is to be out of God. That's all it's saying. You're off doing your own thing. And God's standing over there going, yeah, that's going to turn out bad, but they're not paying any attention, nor are they asking. So what am I going to do about it? That's that verse. So here's what I want us to do. And we're going to do this more than once. For those of you who are interested. I want us to make a big line. I know service is going to start here in a few minutes, but I want us to make a big line where we got people on each side of us. So big circle. And I'll say what we're doing before you volunteer. I want you to pray for the person on your right and on your left that God gives them an eternal perspective, that this thing begins birthing in us, that we, his people, actually begin to start thinking and filtering all of life through, I wonder what God thinks of this. And then next Sunday we'll pick it up and take it another level deeper.